Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I hope you hear me well. Thank you for joining this session of the Tax and Development Days related to the Gender Balance Maturity Model developed by the Forum on Tax Administration, the FTA, in collaboration with the African Tax Administration Forum, the ATAF. I am Rana Ashambulaya, advisor at the Forum on Tax Administration, as well as the Task Force on Tax Crime. I am happy to make this presentation on the gender balance maturity model, improving gender balance within our tax administrations through self-assessment. Also, I would like to thank Peter Green, head of FTA and TFTC units, for supporting me during this session to answer your questions. His participation today is much appreciated as he has done a great job in drafting the maturity model. Here is how the session will be run. We will first have the chance to hear a keynote speech from the sponsor of the Gender Balance Network, the Commissioner of the Swedish Tax Agency, Ms. Katrin Westling-Palm. She's greatly committed to achieving gender balance and diversity in her tax administration, and she would like to spread the word. Then I will present the gender balance maturity model and give you updates on its application so far. Finally, we will listen to 3 country officials presenting on their experience with the self-assessment against the gender balance maturity model, but also more generally on the measures taken in their administration to enhance gender equality. Ms. Barbara Hero from the French Tax Administration, Ms. Sonia Camrani from the Swedish Tax Agency, and Ms. Valeria Moura Venturella from the Brazilian Tax Administration. Now let's hear the opening speech of Commissioner Westling-Palm.
Dear tax colleagues, as tax administrations, we play an important role in our local societies, as well on the global arena. What we prioritize and how we carry out our missions affect the economy as a whole and the everyday life of people and businesses. And we all know that our aim is to use our resources wisely and efficiently in order to enhance tax compliance and secure financing of the public sector. But how are we going to do that when everything around us is changing so fast? In my opinion, today's solutions will not be enough to meet tomorrow's demands. As tax administrations, we are handling a number of challenges. One is the digital transformation. Of course, new technology creates wonderful opportunities, but it can also be a challenge. We must keep in mind that digital transformation is about people, because technology is to be used and understood by people. As chair of the OECD FTA Gender Balance Network, I sometimes get the question, why should we focus on gender when we have so many other challenges? Well, gender equality is not only about women's rights, it's about human rights. I believe in meeting future challenges, we have a great potential to make a difference and to do it better. It's a well-proven fact that gender-equal organizations are more efficient. Diverse teams are more innovative, they make better decisions and achieve superior results. With this in mind, it's a win-win situation for us to understand and strive for increased gender equality. Each year, OECD FTA releases an edition of the Tax Administration series. The report shows that in the majority of countries, the percentage of female executives do not correspond to the percentage of female staff. Far from it. This indicates that we have a great potential and can do better in this field. And how can we do better? Well, research shows that we all have unconscious bias, and this can affect our decisions in a negative way. So we need to make sure that we understand our unconscious bias and challenge them. For example, who do we see as potential leaders? I believe that we can take necessary and important steps in this field. And to name few of them, we can increase knowledge on stereotypes, and we can empower staff and leaders, and we can also be mindful of the gender and diversity perspective when working with AI and digitalization. But in order to make a difference, we need knowledge about how we are performing and what steps we can take to improve. This is why I'm very, very happy that we now have a gender-balanced maturity model. By using it, we will gain valuable insights for processing gender equality and build stronger and more efficient tax administrations. Thank you for listening.
Great. As Catherine Westling-Pan just said, to make a difference, we need knowledge on how we are performing and what steps we need to improve. This is where the gender balance maturity model can help your administration assess its level of maturity in the area of gender balance and will push you to think about what can be made to improve gender balance within your tax organization. Before going deeper into details about the maturity model, here are the last updates on the development of the model. As part of the piloting stage of the maturity model, early January, we have circulated the model among FTA country members as well as members of the regional tax organizations, asking countries to carry out their self-assessment and to provide us with their inputs on the model. So far, we have collected 30 answers from countries who have self-assessed their administration and have provided us with useful comments. All these comments are very helpful and they will allow us to make the necessary changes to the model in order to adapt it to as many countries as possible. In order to improve the model even more, we will need more inputs from countries, so please don't hesitate to carry out the self-assessment and share your drafting inputs with us. I will give you more details about this later on. Now, let's discuss about what is a maturity model. The concept of maturity models is not new, and such models are in common use. What the FTA has done here, in collaboration with ATAF, is adapting the concept to tax administration areas and functions. The gender balance maturity model, as all other maturity models, is a self-assessment tool designed to help administrations determine their current level of maturity and therefore consider the processes and outcomes they may wish to consider to improve their maturity. The model is descriptive rather than being prescriptive about what level is the optimal one for an administration. This means that not all the descriptions in the model will be relevant to a given administration, and that the model is not intended to be judgmental. The best fit for an administration will depend on the circumstances of each administration, as well as its objectives and priorities. Furthermore, one important goal of the model is to encourage conversations internally, where both staff and managers can have frank and open conversations based on the model that can help them to develop a common understanding of where their administration is regarding gender equality and why. Since this exercise is done as a confidential self-assessment, there's no pressure from being rated against other administrations. The model is based on 5 levels of maturity, from the emerging level to the aspirational level. The emerging level is intended to represent tax administrations which have already developed to a certain extent but which, at least in the area of gender balance, have significant further progress they could make, where the aspirational level has the intention to look forward at what might be possible in the medium term as the use of new technology tools develops and as tax administrations move towards more seamless tax administration. The level in between is established, which is intended to represent where many advanced tax administrations, such as FTA members, might be expected to cluster. The two other levels I haven't quoted here are progressing and leading. I won't go too deep into details here, as all relevant information concerning each level can be found in the model. Here is concretely how the maturity model is presented. We can see that the model is divided into different indicative attributes, which correspond to the top and foremost level of description in the model. Each attribute is then divided into several storylines, then composed of different descriptive elements for each levels. More concretely, the gender balance maturity model contains 5 core indicative attributes, which are strategy, governance, culture, data collection and use, and the external dimension. We can notice at the top of the screenshot here, the breakdown between the different levels we just spoke about, emerging, progressing, established, etc. Each level is clearly described here. But again, this doesn't mean that your administration is supposed to meet all the criteria. Also, some element can be missing for a tax administration. These are all indicative descriptions for each level. The goal here is the discussion among staff and managers. When we will receive a satisfying number of self-assessments and comments from countries, we will be able to publish the results. The results will be published on an anonymized manner using this kind of heat map. Each jurisdiction is represented by a letter, and each indicative attribute has been assigned a square to show the self-assessment level of each administration. The map is sorted by the average maturity level of the administrations. Note the colors here. Emerging level is represented in deep blue, and the closer we come to the aspirational level, the more orange colored the map is, to end up dark brown for jurisdictions that assessed their level of gender balance as aspirational. This type of diagram is very interesting as it reveals many different stories. For instance, we can see that only few administrations consistently assess themselves to be on a single maturity level across all the attributes, and very few assessed their administration as being aspirational. Also, we can see that many administrations consider themselves being at emerging or progressing level. It shows that although gender balance is progressing well in tax administrations globally, many administrations deem that they have some way to go to reach a consistently gender balanced level. The spider diagram has a higher level of granularity as it shows the indicative attributes along with average self-assessed maturity levels. The levels of maturity are represented by the number 1 to 5. This diagram shows that strategy, governance, and culture are calibrated around the established level for all the respondents, but is also a good illustration of the weaknesses of the different administrations. The external dimension, for example, is close to emerging for all administrations. We also, into the publication, take into consideration the self-assessment process. This diagram shows the minimum, average, and maximum values for the number of staff who participated in the self-assessment and the time to complete the self-assessment process. The number of staff varies from 1 to 23 with an average of 5, while the time taken to complete self-assessment varies between 1 and 40 hours, with an average of 7 hours. Important takeaways from the diagram may be that the model can be used by both small, medium, large, and very large administrations, and that the completion time varies considerably. Now that you have a better view of how the gender balance maturity model works, let's hear our colleagues from France, Sweden, and Brazil telling us about their experience using this model. We will first start with Ms. Barbara Hérault, who is head of the Working Life Conditions and Diversity Department at the French Tax Administration. This office is responsible for gender equality in the workplace. Barbara is also the national coordinator of the professional network Femmes de la DGFIP, launched on the 8th of March 2022. She will present on the measures taken by the French tax administration in order to enhance gender equality in the workplace. The floor is yours, Barbara.
Alors,
So,
je suis effectivement Barbara Hérault. Je travaille
my
pour
name is
la
Barbara Hérault. I work for the General Directorate of Public Fundings. That's on the second slide. I don't know if I can move the slides myself. There you go. Thank you very much. So I work for the General Directorate of Public Finances, an administration that is attached to the Ministry of Economy, Finance, and Industrial and Digital Sovereignty Ministry. That's the name of our ministry. The Ministry of Finance in France has about 130,000 agents, and the General Directorate for Public Finances is an administration with 80 that accounts for 87% of the headcount, 95,000 agents, out of which 58% of women. As you can see on the graph, women are represented by the color orange. This is a very feminine administration. In France, we have 4 categories of staff. That is C for very technical missions, and the more you go towards A or A plus, these are missions with significant intellectual added value and for management positions. Unsurprisingly, you can see that the share of women is very high in the first levels, and that we clearly have an issue on higher levels, since on the very left, you can see the A plus category, so higher category of civil servants, and there's almost just a line that is barely visible on the share of women in those positions, which is at the highest level of the pyramid. Next slide. The General Directorate of Public Finances, out of its 95,000 agents, includes 132 local directorates or services spread throughout the French territory, but also overseas. As part of my administration, which is called Bercy, I put a little cute picture. I wanted to include Tom Cruise because, as you may know, Mission Impossible 2 was partly filmed on this building. So that's for the fun fact. This administration, Bercy, has a human resources department that includes 7 offices in charge of staff management, mobility, assignments, training, and there is one office which I manage in charge of working conditions, diversity, and professional equality. So it's a cross-functional management unit that works for all the 95,000 agents, regardless of their position in the organizational chart or functions. Let's get to the substance now. In the next slide, you will see that professional equality in the tax administration in France is mostly concerning for higher management positions. As you can see on the left, the share of women is almost 58% of total headcount. We are carefully tracking the level of or share of women in internal applications, in skills lists, which is the possibility to evolve career-wise through certifying your skills. And out of those three ways to evolve in your career, you can see the graph on the left showing that we are beyond 60% of representation of women. However, when you look at the position of women or share of women in higher level positions, that's the graph on the right, you can see that there's a significant decline. As you can see at the very bottom of the slide, or the organizational chart rather, this was said in the introduction, France is no exception. Out of the management positions, there's only 31% of women when they account for 58% of the total headcount. By the French law, we have implemented an obligation of gender balance on the first appointment when it comes to a management position. And by abiding to this law, we have managed in France and within the tax administration to a share of women of almost 40%, 42%. We managed to do this by implementing gender balance in the members of juries who take care of recruitment. In the French tax administration, this is really a glass ceiling. Women are there. They are in majority of total headcount when they start their career, but then they disappear from higher level management positions, which is a concern for the French tax administration. And this led us to draft a first action plan for professional equality for 20 to 22. We are still working on the end, following this action plan in 2024, and we have set out 5 priorities as part of this action plan. The first one is to try and better articulate and find a balance between professional and personal life, for example, by implementing remote work, taking into account parenting, and also by supporting caregiving, because we know that most of the time, caregivers of loved ones who struggle or who are in their end of life are often women. So the first priority is to help women articulate and find a balance between their professional and personal life. The second priority is to fight against gender stereotypes and promote diversity of occupations by being even more demanding during the recruitment process, where we try to find gender balance and in selection processes. In the French tax administration, there's a big part on IT and data mining, especially when it comes to tax audits. We have very few women who apply to those positions, although they do study IT and data mining, but they don't apply, which is a concern for us. So we are really trying to be present during their trainings to let them know that women are welcome to apply. A third priority is to ensure equal pay and equal career paths. We have set an objective, which is to resolve pay gaps and to carry out cohort studies in order to better understand the evolution of women in their career. We recently did a cohort study out of 744 agents who started in our administration in 1997, and we compared their career evolution to a similar study of agents who started in our administration 10 years prior. What did we observe? That things are going better for women, they are more present, they have an easier access to higher level positions than 10 years before, but they still face obstacles and they don't reach higher level positions as fast as their men counterpart who started in the same year and in the same category. We also have a fourth priority, which is to prevent and combat gender-based and sexual violence. In order to do so, we have implemented a very ambitious training plan, and we did this successfully since we trained more than 51,000 agents to fight gender-based and sexual violence, and we continue to train them continuously and to allow managers to identify an agent who might be a victim of those phenomena. It is our responsibility as an employer to identify this and to prevent this at work, more specifically. Finally, we have set out a fifth priority, which also matches the model of maturity, which is to improve governance in terms of professional equality. So where are we standing in this plan? We have managed to lead or implement more than 93% of those actions. 7% of actions remaining have not been completed and have not been initiated. Out of these, we have an action that will be implemented in 2024, which is to document and assess pay gaps. Since women do not evolve professionally as fast as men, and although the pay grid in France is a set grid and not a merit-based payment grid, there are payment gaps since women do not evolve as fast as women. However, we are going to launch a large study in 2024 to assess this, which will help us document our action plan and most importantly to share it to women so they really become aware of what's happening for them. We really think it is necessary to document this. We have implemented an adapted governance. That's my next slide.
Vous voyez un joli graphique en soleil au sein de
You
mon
can
bureau.
see this graph. And in my office, I have a man who is the reference for diversity, employment and equality, who really represents professional equality standards. And there are 8 counterparts in the 8 administrative regions in France. We have contact points for the 132 directorates, not just one reference point who's the national reference points, but that's broken down regionally as well. These are clearly identified contact points. They are available to all of the directorates that they are responsible for. All of this governance system means that we can be very reactive in situations, but also about collecting feedback. We also have flagship moments as well during the year. Once a year, we have an annual seminar where we receive the regional contact points, but also some of our members from the regions. This is the case for our women's network. We have created a female network last year. This is quite specific because it's a professional network, whereas most women's networks in the country and in the French civil society are networks with a pay membership, whereas we have decided to have a professional network, which means that any action that we take is financed by the budget of our administration. And this women's network does have a lot of actions, including one that you find in a lot of different networks, which is mentorship. Through mentorship, you can enable women to take action with leadership, understanding different platforms, and to also have conferences with different people to help women be bolder in their careers. All of this governance and action plan is advertised and documented as well to try to understand what has been drawn up in the maturity scale to create a culture. This will be my last slide now because we have an intranet for DG FIP. It is very bulky. You can see a lot of the things here on the screen. So we have this DG FIP website with a page dedicated to professional equality where we frequently add on a weekly basis any news. You can see on the left-hand side, for example, we put an infographic up during the parental week to discuss what parenthood was for our administration. And we saw that now men almost take parental leave as frequently as women do, which isn't something that we can take for granted yet, like in other countries where Sweden, it's shared out a bit more fairly. So I think we need to develop this culture and show that things are moving forward. We also use the intranet as well to distribute any information about our women's network. You can see the logo and the representation with the women on a blue background. So that is what the French civil service has put in place for professional equality, which is becoming quite mature now, which we have been working on this maturity scale. It means that we're able to self-assess with quite a high amount of information on how data is used, how it's collected. We've developed the governance quite a lot, but now we need to look at the external side of things. Now we mostly concentrate on ourselves and our 95,000 agents because, as you saw, we had a lot to do. But thank you for listening, and I'm available if you have any questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Barbara, for sharing the French experience in the area of improving gender balance within the French tax administration. Let's now move on to Miss Sonia Kamrani from Sweden. Sonia is a coordinator for gender equality and a case officer in the Department of Civil Registration. She is also the Swedish gender champion at the Swedish Tax Agency. She wrote her thesis in 2021 on women's and men's career experiences from a gender perspective in the private sector. Sonia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Rana. And I want to say thanks to the OECD for setting up this event. I'm very honored and happy to share Sweden's experience of using gender maturity model. I would like to start by saying that this presentation is just a simplified summary on what steps we have taken concrete in the Swedish Tax Agency. And we hope that this could inspire other administration to consider using this tool, either to identify a starting point for discussions or as a supplementary method along other gender and diversity initiatives. Firstly, I like to stress that there is no one right way of doing this. We all have different circumstances and conditions. So this is how we started the process. I would like to say that at this stage of preparing, the assessment is probably the biggest part of the whole process. The first thing we did was to create a working group to carry out the self-assessment. This group includes my fellow colleague Linda Ekman and me. So as Linda and I already were familiar with the maturity model through the work of FDA and Gender Balance Network as the Swedish champions, we were naturally appointed as facilitators. An important factor to think about when you choose facilitators is that they should be familiar with the gender equality issues of your organization. And they also should understand the purpose of performing such a maturity model. And it's also important to give them necessary time to get to know the model well. The next step was to choose the appropriate forum that fits the timeline and the participants' schedules. What is doable taking into account time and resources? So we planned for virtual meetings because we had people located all across the country. The next step was to translate the model to Swedish. We also made adjustments in the interpretation of the model to fit our administration structure. So bear in mind, there is no one-size-fits-all solution in this scenario. Lastly, we sent out our invites and attached them with introductory material for them to read in advance. Now, the process of the self-assessment. The working group decided on setting up 2 half-day seminars. The first group to assess was the Gender Equality Network within the SDA. This network has members from every department, and the role is to raise awareness about gender equality issues in their specific divisions. The second seminar was aimed for the managers. These participants were elected by different departments and held different positions to get a variety of perspectives. One advantage that we noticed by having 2 separate sessions was that both groups could feel much freer in expressing their views on the subjects with those they had similar position and role in the administration. And interestingly, the outcome from the Gender Equality Network aligned quite similar to the results of the managers. So let's talk about the structure of the seminars. The seminars were built in such a way that the participants had to start reading the maturity levels for each indicative attribution, for example, strategy, for a few minutes in silence. Then they had time for questions. If they have any questions, they could ask them then. And afterwards, they could write in the chat of the forum which maturity level they felt that suited the best, and together with their main reasons. After that, there was time for dialogue. They could review each other's answers and reflect on the outcome together while sharing their thoughts. This setup showed to be quite effective. We used the same procedure for each attribute throughout the assessment. During the seminars, we made sure to document all the discussions and also the written answers from the chats. And afterwards, we weighted the both results from the 2 seminars into a final result, which we later submitted to the FDA. So what are the next steps? The working group is now preparing a full report to the administration, a top management team, and our commissioner, who we got to listen to at the beginning of this session. And this report includes all the dialogue summarized and anonymized. We will also identify areas of opportunities and propose measures to be taken into account when it's time to implement. These are our thoughts on what we can improve for next time. Should we have in-person seminars instead of virtual meetings? Would we have gained more knowledge and better assessment if we had more participants or more hours for seminars? And do we involve the same people, or do we involve other people just to get different perspectives? We don't have the answer to these questions yet, but it's important to highlight the fact that you have to consider whether adding more resources would potentially produce better results. This is something we need to continue reflecting on. And I would like to end the presentation by showing parts of the feedback we got from our 2 groups. These are the voices from the Gender Equality Network. You can have different degrees of maturity within the organization. Culture is perceived differently depending on where in the organization you work. Many believe that gender equality is a matter of human resources. Sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between the external and internal perspectives. And these are the voices from the managers. The dialogue about these questions is such a powerful tool. It's also in the dialogue that I learn more about where we are and why certain issues are important. It is important to talk about gender balance to increase awareness. Gender equality and diversity should be seen as the obvious prerequisites for conducting an effective tax administration and not just an internal HR process. Having said that, I would like to thank you all for listening, and yet again, thanks to the OECD for giving us the opportunity.
Many thanks, Sonia, for this insightful presentation. I'm sure it will be very useful for many countries attending this meeting today. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Last but not least, let's listen to Miss Valeria Venturella, who is a tax analyst at Receita Federal do Brasil. She studied education and was a teacher and professor before joining the Brazilian Tax Authority in 2013, where she has not landed far from her area of expertise, as she is responsible for international and post-graduation courses for the tax administration's employees at the Center for Corporate Education. Please, Valeria, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. It's still morning here in Brazil. I hope you all hear me well. First of all, I'd like to thank you all, thank OECD and especially Rana for helping me in my as I prepared for participating here today. It's an honor for us in Brazil to be part of this beautiful path that we are all taking together. I'd like to share with you our experience from Brazil in discussing and completing the gender balance maturity model. Here we go. Who did it? We are a very big and very complex organization, Receita Federal do Brasil. And this very first time that we attempted discussing and completing the maturity model, we restricted ourselves to central instances of our organization. So we counted with the participation of Juliano, Undersecretary of Corporate Governance, Marcelo, our General HR Coordinator, Raquel, our Manager of Career Development at our institution, Denise Pereira, she's the Manager of Quality of Life in our institution, and me. I was also lucky enough to be familiar with the model because of my participation in Gender Balance Network, and I was kind of an ambassador of the model to our coordinators and secretaries. So how did we do it? We studied the document and the form individually first. We met to discuss our understandings and possible doubts about each of the elements of the model and the indicative attributes and levels. And then we had further meetings to go through each one of the elements, trying to identify our institution's positions in each one of them. All our meetings were virtual, of course, because Brazil is a very big country and each person lives in a different part of the country. But we don't consider that a problem. This has been basically the way we have been doing things in our institution since 2020. And then, what was it like? Well, we consider the model very, very well structured and organized. It's very clear, and it was easy to identify our institution's general position in each indicative attribute. I think that, first of all, the instrument is really very clear. But there was a second thing. As we all work for central instances of the organization, we think that we had more or less the same views. So it was very easy for us to identify or to assess our understanding or where our institution was in each one of the elements. And it was very hard to realize how far we are from the ideal aspirational level. That was something very difficult for us. We all knew it, but it was difficult to come to this conclusion anyway. And then, what do we plan to do differently next time? We are already planning to have a second experience next year, more or less by the same time next year. And first, we are going to translate the document into Portuguese because it was studied and analyzed and worked on in English. We are going to promote meetings with regional leaders for familiarizing and sensitizing because we intend to expand the discussion, the reflection, and the discussion all over Brazil for our next experience. We intend to promote regional discussions for partial evaluations and then general debates for a more general view. And we, just like Sweden, would like to compile our evaluations in one document, registering comments. We came to the conclusion that the maturity model is much more than an instrument for self-evaluation, but it's a very, very powerful tool for promoting discussion. We realized how much it promoted discussion among the members of this very small group. And we think that with a little more preparation, we can start a very important debate, periodical debate about the themes of the maturity model and spread it all over our organization. So with this, we would like to thank you for the chance to share our experience and leave you with the words of someone we all admire very much, the former president of the United States, Barack Obama, who says that when everybody's equal, we are all more free. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Val. What a useful and very helpful testimony from Brazil. We are very glad that you found the maturity model very clear and that you are planning to continue working with it. Thank you very much. Thank you again to Sonia and to Barbara for these inspiring testimonies. So I hope that you've got information you were looking for when registering for this session. However, if you would like to get more information about other maturity models developed by the FTA, as well as more background elements, you can find all relevant information on OECD public website on the pages dedicated to the Forum on Tax Administration, and the slides will be circulated afterwards so you can access the links. Also, before wrapping up this session, as I said at the beginning, the FTA Secretariat would be very happy to get your self-assessment as well as your feedback on the gender balance maturity model. So if you're interested in taking part to the piloting stage of the model, please write us an email at fta@oecd.org and we will contact you in order to provide you with all the necessary information. I would like to thank a lot the donors who make this work possible by supporting us.